Hi, everyone. Barbara Sullivan. I want to give this an extra minute. We have some folks that are just logging in and in the waiting room. And we're going to get started in about a minute with our webinar with Final Exit. So give us just another minute or so.
Barbara, this is Maureen. Can you hear me?
Hi, Maureen. Yep.
I'm having a lot of problems with the internet connection in this hotel room. So in case I drop out, I'm taking good notes.
Okay, well, try to pop back on. Do you have the call-in number too?
I'm sure it was in that email you sent out.
Yes, it was probably in the original one. So if you don't, I know Travis is going to monitor the emails. So shoot us an email and he'll send you the telephone call in if you need to.
Okay, thank you.
All right, no problem. Well, without further ado, I know we have a nice scheduled webinar, so we're going to start. First of all, I want to ask everybody to put themselves on mute so that our speaker has no background noise. We are encouraging you to introduce yourself in the chat, which is great. It would give our speakers and our hosts an idea of where you are, who you are, and what part of the country. And also, any questions you have would be great. You can put them into the chat, and our speaker, Rob, will be monitoring them throughout the course of the presentation. So I know you didn't call in to hear from me, so I'm going to introduce Gary Witherspoon. I almost got it right. Who is the board member responsible for outreach and education for Final Exit Network. So Gary, without further ado, I'm going to let you introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you so much for this opportunity. This webinar is coming out of the recent conference, and Final Exit Network was one of the sponsors for that conference, and we discovered that VTV and FIN, as we call it, are kind of natural partners. Now, I would say allies in this death with dignity, end-of-life care movement. So I'm just delighted that we have this opportunity. Rob Rivas is my friend and colleague. We go back a long way. Rob recruited me in a courtroom 7 years ago now, Rob, and since then, I've really grown to appreciate him greatly. He has been in court numerous times on our behalf, and so far has a tremendously successful record for defending us and the right of people to decide what happens to them on their own terms at the end of their lives. He is also the brains behind a new service that Ben is offering, which he will be telling you about, which is aimed at dealing with the issue of dementia. We have a growing epidemic in this country of people who may not be legally competent to defend their final wishes in advance directives. And Rob has taken that on as a special challenge. So without any further ado, Rob, thank you so much for being willing to do this.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Gary. As Gary said, I live in, I'm a lawyer and I live in Tallahassee, Florida. My law firm is based in Palm Beach County, in Boca Raton, actually. My practice is really scattered around Florida and the country. And I represent Final Exit Network, which is a nationwide non-for-profit organization involved in the movement for the right to death with dignity. I've been involved in the Right to Die movement since the mid-1990s when I represented Final Exit Network's predecessor, the Hemlock Society. I'm really technologically deprived, but let me try to put the first of some screens I'm going to use. Have I posted the Final Exit Network square? So it's good. Okay. This is a statement about Final Exit Network's purposes and identity. We hold that mentally competent adults who suffer from a terminal illness, intractable physical pain, chronic or progressive physical disabilities, or who face loss of autonomy and selfhood through dementia have a basic human right to choose to end their lives when they judge their quality of life to be unacceptable. And here is the essential contact information for Final Exit Network. Today, I'm going to talk, as Gary mentioned, about our Supplemental Advance Directive for Dementia Care. Although I'm going to start real broadly just to go over a few things that you may hear about and talk about, see on the news a lot about the right to die as it's evolving in our lifetimes in our country. Everywhere in the and give you some just definitions too. Everywhere in America, it's a crime to commit euthanasia. It's not legal anywhere in the United States. It is legal in Canada. They have what is referred to as MAID, an acronym for Medical Aid in Dying, in Canada. And the MAID, as it's performed in Canada, actually involves the physician applying doing the injection herself. And that's the distinction between euthanasia and assistance in a suicide and some of these other concepts involved in the right to death with dignity, is that the last act that is necessary for the person's death to take place is performed by the person who's committing the euthanasia. In the case of a doctor, it would be a doctor by doing an injection. Assistance in a suicide always involves a situation where somebody provides some form of assistance in the suicide. And I'm going to use the word suicide because we don't have a better word in our language. There just isn't a word to use to refer to an intelligent, well-decided, competently decided, carefully thought out decision to discontinue suffering. I don't think that's suicide, but you're going to hear me sometimes refer to it as suicide because I just deal with the law, and this is what it is as far as the law is concerned. And it's not practical to talk about it without using that term. I also think, as Derek Humphreys once said, he's the one of the major founders of the Right to Die movement in America. He always said that he believed that someday the word suicide is going to have a well-known secondary definition or a well-known additional definition that involves rational suicide, a situation where it's not like a suicide to be condemned. It's like a suicide that somebody chose to do intelligently. But in any event, you may remember when Jack Kevorkian had his infamous instances of assisting in a suicide. He wasn't charged with murder because he committed euthanasia. He instead was charged with assisting in a suicide because he always made sure to have the patient in a bed was required to push down on a plunger as the last act that was necessary to cause the death. Even though Kevorkian may have set everything up, that last act was performed by the patient. So that's why it was labeled legally assistance in a suicide. So assistance in a suicide is not euthanasia. One form of assistance in a suicide has been made legal in some states under some circumstances, and it is referred to in the United States as physician aid in dying. Lately, people have begun calling it MAID. I think that's just being borrowed from Canada, but there's a very big difference between American style physician aid in dying and Canadian style medical aid in dying. And the difference is the one I've already mentioned. In Canada, there's true euthanasia. In the United States, the physician, under carefully prescribed circumstances, can prescribe the drug in adequate amount to enable somebody to take the drug and die. The physician has nothing more to do with it once the prescription is written, and does not actually do the thing that causes the death. That has to be done by the person who chooses to die. Penn jurisdiction have comprehensive physician aid in dying laws in America. They are California, Colorado, the District of Columbia, Hawaii, Oregon, Vermont, Washington State, New Jersey, Maine, and New Mexico. Some people say that there are 11 jurisdictions with physician aid and dying or MAID. Those people are including Montana. Montana has a Supreme Court decision that made it not a crime for a physician to aid someone in their death by giving a prescription, but there's no comprehensive MAID law, physician aid and dying law in Montana. So I don't include Montana as a place with physician aid and dying because it's not practical there for doctors. And I don't know of the practice being widespread because doctors are subject to civil liability. They could have their licenses removed. Everything, all kinds of things can be done because there's no comprehensive aid and dying law in Montana. But I wanted to explain that so you know why sometimes you'll hear people refer to there being 11 jurisdictions with MAID. In 41 states in the United States, assisting in a suicide is a felony. If you send me an email, I'll send you my survey identifying those states and explaining what the differences are between the laws. Most of the laws in this area regarding end-of-life healthcare they're governed by state law. There's not, for the most part, federal laws governing these issues. And every one of the states has its own laws, and they're very different. It's one of the things that's frustrating about even talking about the subject. But most of the states with physician aid and dying laws make it a felony for anyone acting outside of the framework of the PAD law to assist in the suicide. So you say, well, New Jersey allows assisted dying. Well, New Jersey has a comprehensive physician aid and dying law, but if you assist somebody in a suicide and you're not a physician, or even if you are a physician, it happens outside the terminology, outside of the prescribed requirements of the physician aid and dying law, then you are definitely subject to being charged with assisting in a suicide. Another one of the most important developments in our lifetimes is the growth of advance directives and their legalization, and different laws in states all over the country prescribing what rules apply to advance directives. You write out something, a legal document. It tells what your preferences are about your healthcare treatment after you're no longer competent. You no longer have capacity to make these decisions yourself. You can appoint a surrogate. I'm going to use the word surrogate. The person who's a surrogate is your trusted friend, somebody who you have entrusted with the responsibility to tell healthcare personnel what
Okay, I got it.
to tell healthcare personnel what your decisions are about healthcare matters when you can't speak for yourself. The most elemental of all advance directives was highlighted in the Terry Schiavo case. The absolute minimum that's form of advance directive in every state in the union is that it requires that if you're being kept alive by artificial means of life support, or you want future artificial means of life support not to be started, on the concurrence of 2 doctors, if there's no reasonable chance that the patient's condition will improve, and thus the artificial means of life support would only serve to prolong the dying process, in other words, it would be an act of futility, then your healthcare providers can discontinue or not initiate the artificial means of life support. That's the thing that would have made all the difference in the world to Terry Schiavo, when instead of being able to pass as she would have preferred, she was required to be the subject of 14 years of litigation. But above and beyond that basic advance directive, there are all kinds of things that people can put in advance directives, and some states have more and less strong laws about enforcing them, and that's a little beyond the scope of what I'll be here to talk about today. Let's see, is that number 6? One of the things that I want to talk about is called VSED, VSED, or the voluntary stopping of eating and drinking, or voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. To somebody that doesn't know anything about it, it might sound disturbing. Even in the Terry Schiavo case, the opponents of allowing her to die as she would have wanted to die kept saying, oh, they're going to starve her to death. But clinicians will tell you that dying by voluntarily stopping eating and drinking is a peaceful and dignified way to induce your own death, provided that you have good palliative care and you planned carefully. You can't just do it without good planning. There's a brand new book out. You'll see more about it there on the screen. It has, even the title says that VSED has become a compassionate, widely available option for hastening death, by Timothy Quill, Paul Menzel, Thaddeus Pope, and Judith Schwartz. These are all people who are enormous names in the field of legal and medical ethics surrounding right to die issues. And they have put out a comprehensive new book about VSED. VSED is legal in the United States because a competent adult's decision to stop eating and drinking it's protected from interference by the Constitution and common law. People who provide support to a dying patient during VSED are not accused of the crime of assisting in a suicide, and it's not considered a suicide because the person has the legal right to proceed with VSED, and that makes it different from generally other forms of what are referred to as suicide. The rule, though, that a competent adult's decision can't be interfered with if they decide to VSED applies only to a person who is competent at the time that he or she stops eating or drinking. There you go. I just wanted to get that thing off the screen. The dementia poses unique legal problems in this entire area, and now is the time to solve them. During the coming decade, 10 million baby boomers are expected to enter the state of dementia. Some call it Generation Alzheimer's or a dementia tsunami. Final Exit Network is doing everything we can think of to help these people find a path forward. People can exit in the early stages of dementia. Final Exit Network has the Exit Guide program, in which you work with a counselor who does not commit any unlawful assistance in a suicide, but will help to guide you through the process of finding legal ways to induce your own death or to terminate your own suffering. But Final Exit Network cannot and will not work with anybody on that unless they're competent. They have to be fully competent at all stages of development of this whole concept of inducing their own death. And the Exit Guide program is available for people who choose to use it when they can. Exit Guide services can't be prescribed in advance of losing competence. If it's next to impossible to know when the window of opportunity closes and you are incapacitated to the point of no return. Many people say dementia itself insidiously tricks you into thinking you are more competent than you are, and even that your life is happier or at least less unpleasant than you think it is. Some say it insidiously leads you to putting off until it's too late the concept of exiting of your own free will while you're competent, and then their window closes. People who choose to exit before the window of opportunity closes are always afraid that they're leaving good days on the table, so to speak. The law sets a very low threshold for being considered competent to make a living will or any form of advance directive or to make any form of healthcare decision. You only have to know what you want and understand the consequences of your choice in the most general way, as in, when the breathing tube is disconnected, I'm going to die. If that's the most advanced thought process you have about it, then that's more than adequate to make a competent decision to discontinue artificial life support. But before you lapse into incapacity, you better make sure you have a good advance directive and appointment of a healthcare surrogate. People often call the surrogate, in some states, the laws use different terminology, but people often call a healthcare surrogate a proxy or a representative or an agent. If the person is appointed under a durable power of attorney for healthcare, they're all the same thing. The durable power of attorney for healthcare is really is getting to be archaic language. That was language that was thought up by lawyers in the 70s who didn't know what to call this person. And so they fell back on language that was well known. There's durable powers of attorney for your financial affairs, and this is a durable power of attorney for your healthcare affairs. But I think that sooner or later, the idea of a POA for healthcare is going to be a terminology that dies on the vine. But you need to appoint someone who understands what you want and is committed to carrying out what you want and not what someone else wants for you, and not one who allows others to put pressure on you to do what they think is best. And it has to be somebody who's capable of pushing back. We have a whole new program at Final Exit Network to help people find and establish relationships with surrogates or proxies to make sure that they've got people, good people in those positions. Let me switch back to the share screen. There's one thing I need to mention as a footnote. When I talk about VSED, there's VSED if you voluntarily stop eating and drinking and decide to terminate your suffering that way. But there are those who say the word voluntary doesn't apply if you put it in an advance directive, because it's not voluntary when you're not competent to make that decision. I consider that to be semantic. It's voluntary in the sense that that's what you put in your advance directive, and that was the choice you made. But some people say it's doctrinally incorrect to say that it's voluntary, and they want to call VSED in the circumstance where dementia has advanced to the point where VSED should be applied. They prefer to call it SED for stopping eating and drinking by AD for advance directive. SED by advance directive. It's just too many words for me. But there, it is what it is. So it is going on all across the country that supporters of Death with Dignity are seeking to expand advance directives to enable a competent person in the early stages of terminal dementia to demand VSED in the advanced stages when the person wouldn't otherwise have capacity. There is very little law governing whether or not that advance directive will be honored by healthcare institutions. You may get better assurance of succeeding with it if you die at home and you've talked in advance with a hospice about whether they will stay on board and continue to give you the hospice care you need. If you choose to die this way, then you guaranteed that you're not tied to the need for a healthcare institution of any sort to give you the palliative care you need to die from VSED. But we hope to, Final Exit Network, we hope to advance the law in this area by participating in incremental court cases that will strengthen the legal requirement or the legal ability of people to VSED or SED by AD after they're no longer competent in dementia. We're actively looking for people who have situations where they're being their choice is being interfered with by healthcare institutions, and we can come along and do something to take legal steps, lawsuits if necessary, to advance the patient's ability to VSED based on their advance directive. We've written up a supplemental advance directive for dementia. We call it the SAD, the SADD. It was developed by experts in medicine, law, and bioethics. It can't be used as a patient's primary advance directive. It doesn't cover all of the things that are necessary to be covered in an advance directive. It's intended only to be beside your advance directive and to supplement your advance directive so that your healthcare proxy, your healthcare surrogate can say, in the stage of advanced dementia, this patient wrote up a specific thing, the supplemental advance directive, to guide healthcare providers about what the person wanted. Before you sign a SAD, we urge you, you can download it from Final Exit Network's website. But before you sign it, we urge you to not do that until you've thoroughly vetted your healthcare surrogate and you've got a good one. Download the SAD for free from Final Exit Network, www.finalexitnetwork.org, and you'll find links to the SAD. Don't confuse finalexit.org with our website. Just look at that carefully. There's a half a dozen websites that are similar. Final Exit Network, all three words, .org is ours. But we'll provide free legal support to obtain enforcement of your SAD. And in fact, when you sign it, I'd just be happy to talk to you and spend some time gathering information, notes, to become aware that you're out there and that I might get a call from your surrogate if the time comes and somebody in the healthcare field is interfering with your choice. As long as you're competent, you have a legal right to decline medical treatments, even if you certainly will die as a result. Any medical treatment whatsoever, your consent has to be obtained. And if it isn't obtained, you can't, they don't necessarily have to affirmatively get it, but if you affirmatively make clear that you're a competent person declining medical treatment, you can decline any kind of treatment. You can choose to terminate your life by VSED. That's constitutionally protected and it's protected at common law. But once you're no longer competent, your advance directives and your healthcare surrogate can speak for you. They can instruct your healthcare providers to take no further measures to prolong your life when your dementia reaches a certain point. So, for example, you can specifically instruct that in the event of an illness, pathogenic illness, you reject and deny consent for antibiotics. Generations ago, they used to refer to to the flu as the old man's friend, because when a person was ready to die, the flu would take care of that for them with relatively little pain involved. Here's the problem with applying that rule in dementia. Often a patient continues to be kept alive by hand feeding and by assistance in putting water in the patient's mouth. Sometimes people are kept alive for years by hand feeding and hydration when all of their character and their personality have completely vanished from the earth and they live in a dream world. They respond instinctively and reflexively swallow. They can't form a competent intention to die by VSED, so they don't push away the hand that feeds them. What number is this? Most healthcare providers in assisted living facilities and nursing homes will refuse to stop hand feeding and hydration in accordance with an advance directive that says to stop. This raises the question, if you can order in an advance directive and through the instructions of your surrogate that you receive no medical treatment, why can't you order that you not be fed and watered by hand? This is a huge distinction that is subject to a lot of legal arguments. All the other instructions of your surrogate and in your advance directives are supposed to be followed, even if they cause you to die, even if they're guaranteed to cause you to die. Why is hand feeding and hydration treated differently under the law by people who want to say you can't VSED in my nursing home? The answer is you can order the discontinuation of medical treatment. Note those words, medical treatment. But the healthcare industry, many in the healthcare industry, deny that hand feeding and hydration are medical treatment. There are virtually no legal precedents that establish a patient's right to order VSED in an advance directive. There is a group called the American Society for Post-Acute and Long-Term Care. I note that these are the people who have the most to gain by keeping people alive in a bed for the longest possible period of time. The administrators of nursing homes and long-term care facilities, they officially maintain in their literature that hand feeding and hydration are basic non-medical care. It's not medical care. It's no different from bathing a patient. It's not medical. They even tell their membership that it is unethical for them to comply with a VSED advance directive. This conclusion, of course, we obviously disagree with that. We think they're wrong. We think hand feeding and hydration is medical care, and we think a patient has a right to order that hand feeding and hydration not be done to them in contravention of a clear advance directive. The law is ripe to develop with the times on this issue. The reported literature on this topic contains one case in which a court was asked to enforce a surrogate's instruction that the nursing home allow VSED. In that case, the court denied the surrogate's request, apparently because the patient's advance directive wasn't sufficiently clear. So that's one of the reasons we came up with the Supplemental Advance Directive for Dementia, so that in any future case, the patient's wishes will be perfectly clear. At Final Exit Network, we want to push hard to raise this issue every place where it arises until we can change people's thinking, and we aim to litigate where necessary to enforce the right of a patient to choose VSED in an advance directive when dementia sets in. We've prepared the SAD to be used only as an addendum, again, to your existing general purpose advance directive and appointment of healthcare surrogate. The network's SAD is available to be downloaded. It very specifically and clearly demands that your healthcare providers apply VSED when the time comes. Again, if you're in the clutches of a nursing home or long-term care facility. And it specifies, you can change it if you want, the terms of it if you want, but it specifies what exact state of development of your dementia, what that point is. And it gives very special emphasis to making sure that your surrogate, who you have to trust, is the one who decides when you've reached that stage, when you no longer can recognize your children, for example. And as I said before, we're going to work to stay in touch with people who voluntarily contact us and say that they've signed the SAD, and we'll make note of the identities of their surrogates, and we'll be available to be called by them if they ever have a legal issue. Just send an email to me at the email address listed on the website, or I'm going to post one on the screen here in just a few minutes. But having said all of that, I have not paused for a moment yet to look and see if I have any questions, because I couldn't talk and chew gum at the same time. No, I couldn't talk and read the chat at the same time.
Rob, one of the questions was if you will share the slides. Because it's a lot of information and whatnot.
Sure. The slides aren't exactly all of what I've said. They are exactly some of the things that I've said, but for what they're worth, I certainly have no objection. Village to village, the network has them in a PowerPoint file and is perfectly free to send them to anybody. Anybody can, let me put the slides back up again so that I can go to the one that says, that has my personal contact information. There you go. My personal email is robertrivas@comcast.net. That's my cell phone. I spend months every year in Maine, but that's the same cell phone in Maine, same cell phone number to call me at when I'm in Maine.
Mhm.
I also want to post, while I answer other questions, if there are any, just more details about the activities of Final Exit Network. So you can see here from this list things that Final Exit Network does for its membership. And then we don't seem to have any chat questions. I thought there would be many of them. Does anybody want to? Can we open it up for people to be heard? Just take off the.
Yes, if anyone wants to ask a question, just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask.
Very good.
Well, Rob, I thought to ask what kinds of or types of medical institutions are most likely to disregard an advanced directive aimed at dementia scenarios?
Well, the most likely situation where I've seen this problem arise is in long-term care institutions and nursing homes. Of course, it could take place in a hospital if you had the misfortune to find yourself in a hospital at a time when your surrogate would otherwise be saying that this person's got advanced dementia and is at the point where this advanced directive requires this person to be allowed to VSED, and that's what we're going to do now. If the person's in a hospital, the hospitals are also quite likely to refuse to participate. And especially if the hospitals are affiliated with a religion, because then they'll invoke their right not to participate in the VSED of a patient. And so a hospital is the last place you want to be when the time comes that you choose to terminate your suffering.
Well, suppose one of the attendees here or people who are seeing this video later find themselves in that situation. What kinds of things, what actions would you might take?
To deal with the administration?
Yeah.
Well, first I would walk the surrogate through steps to just communicate, because it's it's downright tragic if litigation breaks out just because people didn't talk good sense to each other before they let it become a legal problem. So I helped the surrogate talk their way through conversations with the hospital, the facility, to try to convince the facility that this person had made lawful choices and that these choices are due to be enforced. If that doesn't work, the next step would be to write a letter, typically from me to the administration, or from a local lawyer to the administration, local lawyer working with me to the administration of the facility. And then and wait and see what they say. Sometimes when they really have it put to them carefully by a good lawyer who shows them exactly what the situation is legally, they say, well, I guess you're right. Or the lawyer goes to the staff and says, hey, he's right. What, you can't refuse to comply with the surrogate's instructions in this instance. Another thing that's going on that we're happy to be a part of if we ever have the opportunity is that hospitals are, not just hospitals, but healthcare facilities of every sort are experiencing lawsuits for failure to comply with advance directives. And those lawsuits seek damages. A hospital in Georgia paid $1 million for wrongfully failing to comply. Actually, it wasn't a refusal. It was just negligence and carelessness. The hospital had an advance directive that said no intubation. Totally unambiguous. The hospital proceeded to intubate. The daughter of the patient said that her mother had suffered through a long period of having to decide whether to terminate her husband's life support. And she made the decision that she didn't want to subject her daughter to that. So she filled out an advance directive that said no intubation. And the hospital intubated her for no better reason. They didn't even have a practice against it. They didn't intubate her, or they intubated her for no better reason than that at the time she needed to be intubated or not. They couldn't find her advance directive, didn't even look for it. And so those kind of lawsuits are they're on the table all across the country, and people have a right for their advance directives to be enforced. And Final Exit Network is interested in getting involved in that kind of litigation as well, if anybody ever comes across that kind of situation.
Can a person take a loved one out of a nursing home at any time that they want?
There are some practical considerations depending on what's necessary to move them safely. But yes, absolutely. We also have a question here in the chat room. What's a residency requirement for the Canadian MAID program? I believe you have to be, they're very strict about this. They don't want people coming to Canada just to take advantage of the MAID program, and they require you to be, I don't know the exact requirements, but they're very strict about it. You got to be a Canadian citizen. You got to have, it may just be that you have to be a Canadian citizen. Actually, now that I think about it, it may be that if you've been living abroad for a while and you return home to Canada and you're a Canadian citizen, you still can avail yourself of MAID. But you can't if you're not a Canadian citizen. And another question is, what about POLST or MOLST? POSTs and MOLSTs are really just very sophisticated advance directives. They're the same thing as your advance directive, except you participate with your doctor in deciding on the terms that you would have wanted in your advance directive, and the doctor signs it as a provided that the doctor agrees. Doctor's got to agree with this in order to sign it as a MOLST or a POLST. But the doctor signs a MOLST. It's a POLST, for example, stands for physician order
For life sustaining.
life-sustaining treatment. And MOLST is a medical order for life-sustaining treatment. And those can be really important to people who are worried that they're going to be released from a hospital and they might have a heart attack and they want to or some other condition that's foreseeable, and they want to make sure that the emergency medical personnel don't try to resuscitate them. A MOLST or a POLST will be authority for emergency healthcare workers not to attempt to resuscitate. Whereas there's a lot of kind of mythology about do not resuscitate orders. Every once in a while, you'll hear somebody say, "Oh, gee whiz, why don't I just tattoo do not resuscitate across my chest?" And that's kind of funny, but the fact is the laws of most states, if an emergency services provider shows up and you have do not resuscitate tattooed across your chest, they're just obligated to ignore that. It is meaningless to them unless it's in a form. Sometimes it has to be on a piece of paper of a certain color, typically yellow or orange. There's a bunch of requirements for do not resuscitate orders, and a POLST or a MOLST is a very good example of a do not resuscitate order that will be enforced by emergency personnel. But the problem with doing anything but that with emergency personnel is it's just entirely too much to impose on EMTs, that they make instantaneous judgments about things that they just don't know about. They got to show up, they got to do what they got to do to revive people, and it's just a one-way valve. That's what they do, unless you comply with very specific laws to make sure that the EMTs can not resuscitate you.
Hey, Rob, I had a physician say that this is an order. This is a physician's order. It has clout.
It is.
Gets attached to your chart. It follows you from room to room, from hospital to hospice. And it's not something you want to fill out years ahead of time. It's something you want to have handy when the end is in sight, whatever that is.
Generally speaking, a POLST or a MOLST, doctors won't even participate in filling them out unless they're aware of a very specific reason. You have a condition now that they're trying to address the treatment of you, and they're trying to address your treatment for a condition that exists now. And that's how it differs very much from an advance directive. An advance directive just states your choices. A POLST or a MOLST is a physician's order.
Question? A question?
There's a question here that it might be helpful to point out that ADs are typically suspended in the emergency room and during surgery. Yeah, I understand most consents to surgery specifically say that. The idea being, and there may be something that you can do to fight back against that, but the idea is that an advance directive is supposed to be intended by the healthcare community to be something that applies when there's a situation where they can think about it in advance, and they can think about it carefully and think about it with a little bit of time at least. And in the middle of a surgery, doctors feel it is completely unreasonable to expect them to think about advance directives when they've got only seconds to take actions that are going to save your life or let you die, and they're just not willing to have that dropped on them, that they have to go read your advance directive before they cauterize a bleeding artery or whatever they're talking about.
Question? When you talk about the advance directive in dementia, I'm curious, are there any clear criteria for where advanced dementia begins, because it's often such a gradual process that I'd love to know how to help people understand when their parent or loved one has reached the point of being considered advanced dementia and therefore eligible for these kinds of exit strategies.
There are whole medical papers, position papers from the Alzheimer's Association, things like that, about how to measure the state of dementia. It's more advanced than I want to be for purposes of the application of the SAD. So I'm not all that educated about it. There's 2 points in time when it becomes really relevant to our work. Number one is in the distinction in the passing over the distinction between being fully competent and being no longer having capacity. And I understand that the process, you can be in a position where you fade in and out of capacity, or your capacity is highly questionable and debatable for a very long period of time. That's what I referred to as the window of opportunity closing. And then when it comes to a situation where somebody wants to instruct in an advance directive their healthcare provider, their healthcare surrogate to apply VSED, we chose to put it in terms that made it obvious that you're well past the point of most people wanting to continue to be kept alive by artificial feeding and hydration. You're pretty much bedbound and you don't recognize your children. Our thinking about that is that the SAD then only applies to people who are really not in a debatable state. They're in advanced dementia by anybody's definition, and they're not in a gray area. Well, it's been 50 minutes, and that's an adequate length of time as far as I'm concerned. If there are no other questions, I'll turn it back over to the VTV staff.
I'd just like to point out that this is education. We're educating ourselves. And there are 2 other ways that your communities and members can get really good information easily. And I underline good information. The first one is the Good Death Society blog. This is a project of Final Exit Network, but it's much, much broader than that. And you can look up there in the archives of very well written, vetted, short articles on almost any aspect of the whole death with dignity, right to die movement. And that's really a user-friendly, easy way to educate yourself. And secondly, we are offering free custom-tailored presentations on any of these topics at communities, village to village network communities across the country, free of charge. Currently, it's mostly by Zoom or some other online way, but for years it's been custom-tailored, personal, designed programs for communities on site. And you can find that on our website. Click on and check the Speakers Bureau for those of you who are really, wanting to educate yourselves.
Well, thank you, Rob. A lot of information. Gary, thank you for the additional information. If you wouldn't mind, Gary, go ahead and do you have that website? You can put it in our chat box, or you can just send it to us and we can pass it on, the reference materials that you mentioned. You're on mute.
I'll send both of them to you, Barbara, and you can decide how to best distribute them. Okay.
I'll post them in the forms.
Okay.
Well, thank you again. I think lots of information, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from some of our folks. And we will share all the information and the recording once it's downloaded. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate your support.
Not a problem.